If Shane had started seeing things more from Rick Grimes' perspective, man, the whole story of The Walking Dead could have gone in a completely different direction. Instead of butting heads every chance they got, Rick and Shane might have actually worked as a team, kind of like a two-man leadership duo that could have balanced each other out. Rick had the moral compass and the calm, logical side, while Shane had the intensity and the fire. If those two could have met in the middle, the group would have been unstoppable early on. Think about it. If Shane had chilled out a bit and seen the value in Rick's way of leading, the group probably wouldn't have split the way it did. The tension at the farm might never have escalated, and maybe Sophia's whole situation would have played out differently. Instead of constantly challenging Rick's decisions, Shane might have been his right-hand man, backing him up instead of trying to take his spot. The two could have built a stronger, more unified group instead of all that division and mistrust. Now fast forward a bit. If they'd both survived long enough to reach Alexandria, that would have been wild. Rick and Shane in Alexandria together. The community wouldn't have known what hit them. Rick would have tried to integrate like he did in the show, but Shane would have been skeptical of all the softness and routine. The two of them together would have probably taken over leadership even faster. They'd bring that "we've been through hell" attitude that Alexandria seriously needed in the beginning. When it comes to the saviors, though, man, that would have been something to see. Shane wouldn't have hesitated the way Rick sometimes did. He'd be all in on taking the fight to Negan early, but with Rick balancing him out, it might have actually worked better. Rick's planning mixed with Shane's aggression could have been the perfect combo. Instead of kneeling to Negan, they might have figured out a smarter way to hit the saviors before they ever got cornered. That war could have ended way sooner, with a lot fewer losses. Daryl would have been an interesting piece of that puzzle. He was loyal to Rick, but Shane's energy kind of matched his in a way. Both were rough around the edges and didn't talk much, but always got things done. Daryl might have ended up being the bridge between the two, the guy who keeps them on the same page when things got heated. Imagine those three running missions together. Pure chaos, but in the best possible way. They'd have been like the ultimate trio of survival instincts and grit. And you gotta think about how different the group dynamics would have been. Without Shane's constant jealousy and power struggles, maybe Laurie and Carl's lives would have turned out differently too. Rick wouldn't have had to carry the guilt of killing his best friend, and that might have changed how dark and cold he got later on. Instead of breaking him down, maybe that partnership would have made Rick even stronger. Someone who could lead without losing himself. In the end, if Shane had just opened his eyes a bit and understood where Rick was coming from, they could have been legends together in that world. Two leaders who balanced each other out. One with heart, one with grit. Shaping the future for everyone they met. The group would have been tighter, the fights cleaner, and maybe by the time they faced the saviors, they'd have been more like a real army than just a band of survivors. It's crazy to think how close they were to that reality, and how one different choice could have changed the whole course of the series. For real, if you think about it, Shane was already halfway to being on Rick's side before things got messy. He respected Rick deep down. He just couldn't handle not being the one in control anymore. If he'd taken a breath and realized Rick wasn't trying to take anything from him, just trying to lead in a way that kept everyone alive and human, he probably would have seen that they actually wanted the same thing. They both wanted to protect their people. They just had different ways of going about it. If Shane had lived long enough to see how far Rick eventually went, he'd probably have been shocked, but also proud. Rick later became that same kind of brutal realist Shane tried to be early on, but he managed to do it without losing his sense of family. If Shane had stuck around, He might have been the one to pull Rick back from going too far in some moments. It's ironic. The guy who used to push for the ruthless option might have been the one helping Rick find balance. Once Rick started getting darker after the governor and Terminus. Imagine how different it would have been at the prison. Shane would have thrived there. Guard towers, fences, daily runs. That's exactly the kind of setup he always wanted. He would have handled the security side like a pro, while Rick focused on rebuilding some kind of society, instead of falling apart like they did in Canon. The group might have lasted there for years, and honestly, the governor wouldn't have stood a chance. Shane wouldn't have let that man anywhere near the place. He'd have shut that whole threat down the second it showed up. And with Daryl in the mix, that's a power squad right there. Daryl was already one of the best at surviving in the wild, and Shane respected strength. He'd have seen Daryl as an equal, not competition. Rick, Shane, and Daryl could have built something that mixed brains, brawn, and street smarts. They'd probably have made Alexandria tougher from day one. Nobody would have gotten away with stealing guns or sneaking out at night under that leadership. The place would have been a fortress. Michonne would have fit into that setup too, no doubt. She respected strong leaders and clear direction. She might have had a tough time trusting Shane at first, but once she saw he'd changed and started working with Rick instead of against him, she'd have his back. Shane was always about results, and Michonne respected that. Together, that group could have easily been the backbone of every major win the survivors ever had. And think about Carl. Growing up seeing Rick and Shane working side by side would have completely changed him. Instead of watching his dad kill his best friend, he'd have grown up around two father figures who both taught him different kinds of strength. Carl could have learned when to be compassionate and when to be ruthless. The perfect balance. Maybe he wouldn't have had to grow up so fast or carry as much trauma as he did. At the end of the day, Rick and Shane were two sides of the same coin. If Shane had just taken the time to understand Rick's mindset, that leadership didn't mean weakness. They could have rewritten how the world worked after it fell apart. Walkers or no walkers, they'd have built something lasting, not just survived. It's kind of crazy to think the biggest downfall in that early group wasn't the apocalypse itself, but two best friends who couldn't see that they were actually fighting for the same thing all along. If Shane had survived long enough to see how big the world got, places like Alexandria, Hilltop, and the Kingdom, he probably would have been blown away. Back when they were just running from walkers through the woods, Shane couldn't even imagine something that organized still existing. But once he saw it, he'd have been all in. He always wanted safety and structure, and that's exactly what those communities were trying to build. The difference is, Shane would have pushed for everyone to be tougher, making sure nobody got too comfortable. When Negan and the Saviors showed up, Shane wouldn't have been about bowing down, not even for a second. He would have backed Rick on fighting back, but he'd also have made sure they struck first, instead of waiting to be cornered. Rick's way was more cautious, trying to save as many lives as possible, but Shane's approach would have been go for the throat. Together, they might have met somewhere in the middle. Smart, but ruthless. The Saviors wouldn't have had that psychological edge they used on Rick's group early on. Shane wouldn't have let Negan walk all over them. It's also worth thinking about how much stronger the group's morale would have been with Shane there. As messed up as he could be sometimes, he was a motivator. He fired people up and made them want to survive. Rick had the heart and inspiration, but Shane had that soldier mentality that made people feel like they could win, even when everything looked impossible. The mix of those two energies could have created a team that never broke down, even in the darkest times. And honestly, seeing Shane grow and adapt would have been a story of its own. Imagine him learning from Rick, actually developing into someone who could control his temper and think before acting. That evolution would have been just as satisfying as Rick's transformation from sheriff to leader of the new world. The two of them could have built a foundation for a new kind of civilization, one that balanced Shane's realism with Rick's humanity. It's the kind of partnership that could have defined the entire post-apocalyptic world. In the end, if Shane had just lived long enough to open his eyes and see that Rick's way wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, the Walking Dead world might have had a completely different tone. Instead of one man breaking down under the weight of leadership, you'd have had two best friends sharing it, carrying that burden together. And maybe, just maybe, by the time the world started rebuilding, they would have both been standing side by side, watching it happen, proud of what they built out of the ashes.